All smear and no idea.
I give the call to the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Shadow Treasurer started out his interesting speech by quoting Taylor Swift from the album 1989. Now, that album was released 8 years ago. Taylor Swift has managed to release 5 albums since. Those opposite managed in the same period of time to deliver $1 trillion of debt, although, in fairness, maybe it's $500 billion for the former Treasurer Frydenberg and $500 billion for Secret Treasurer Morrison. Maybe there was a bit of job sharing there. They delivered us three prime ministers. They delivered us a few deputy prime ministers. They delivered us some better than others. They delivered us 5 secret ministries, and in the same time that Taylor Swift managed to get those 5 albums out, those opposite managed to have 22 failed energy policies and didn't deliver one. The Shadow Treasurer also decided that it was appropriate to quote some interesting pieces from the Financial Review, and it is a great paper of record. I read it every morning, and so I might do the same. And I refer to the article titled "ScoMo's Besties Feed Him to the Wolves," which notes that some of the closest declared friends, or so-called friends, some might call them frenemies, of the former Prime Minister, had some interesting things to say. We saw former Minister Hawke say that, quote, former Prime Minister Morrison, quote, wasn't the greatest listener. I think that might be the understatement of 2022, wasn't the greatest listener. We then saw great friend, the member for Fadden, say, quote, Scotty's a friend as much as one can have a friend in politics. An excellent qualification of a otherwise strong endorsement. And I think the most serious and most appropriate statement was from former Treasurer Frydenberg, who described the Secret Ministries scandal as extreme overreach. And it's good to see that those who are no longer under the puppetry of the former Prime Minister can actually go and say what they believe about the Secret Ministries scandal, whereas everyone else on the coalition benches was forced to back in what they knew to be wrong when they voted to defend the Secret Ministries scandal. Now, while some choose to spend their time defending what was frankly the indefensible over the last 6 months, which this MPI is completely about, this government has got to work in delivering the sorts of legislation that we went to the Australian people saying that we would. Because this government was announced, we have introduced 85 separate bills in 6 months, and so many of them, as I look through the list, so many of them would not have happened if it weren't for the election of the Albanese Labor government. We have the Aged Care Amendment, implementing care reform, making sure that we have nurses on shift 24/7 in our aged care facilities. We have the comprehensive Royal Commission response bill in aged care. We have the climate change bill, acting on climate change, something that those opposite refused to legislate on. We have the Jobs and Skills Australia bill, giving us long-term planning for the jobs and skills needs of Australia. We have the bill introduced and passed, thanks to the work of people on this side of the House, to repeal the cashless debit card. We have the legislation, again passed by this House, to give a tax cut for electric cars, the only tax cut that those opposite seem to oppose. We have the very important work led by the Leader of the House in terms of ensuring that we have paid family and domestic violence leave for all workers in Australia. We have the incentives for pensioners to downsize. We have something that I know you, Deputy Speaker, are very fond of, the high-speed rail bill, which will help connect so many parts of our country. We have the Respect at Work bill, the cheaper childcare bill, the National Anti-Corruption Commission bill, a piece of legislation, now the law of the land, that was promised to the Australian people in 2018 but never delivered because those opposite never believed in it. They just wanted to get it off the agenda. We have the offshore electricity infrastructure legislation to make sure that we can have more renewables plugged into our grid. We have workforce incentive bill. We have the appropriation bills for the Treasurer's brilliant first budget that starts to address just some of the $1 trillion of debt that was left behind by those opposite. And if they want to give us a lecture about cost of living, let's also be honest. And I'd love to see at least one member of the opposition come to that dispatch box and say that and admit that the biggest pressure, the biggest growing cost on our budget today is the $1 trillion of debt that was left by the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison Liberal National Government. We have the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill, which I hope will become the law of the land in sometime in the next 48 hours. We will find out when soon, I hope. We have improvements for paid parental leave, again, making sure that families can spend more time together, and again, legislation that is only in front of this House because the people of Australia chose to change the government. We have, of course, the bill that was introduced today to enable a vote for a voice to Parliament. That will enable next financial year the Australian people to have a say and for that election to be held, or that referendum to be held, in a similar way to how we hold elections in this country in 2022-23. And we have the last piece of proposed legislation that was introduced into this place today for the end of this sitting was the Ministers of State Amendment Bill, to make sure that never again do we have the Parliament treated with such contempt that members who sit in this chamber do not know who is holding what portfolio when they became the minister for that portfolio, and indeed to ensure that other ministers never have the experience that some opposite had, where they never knew that they were job sharing, but of course their boss did. So what we also have is I did not find the argument put forward by the Shadow Treasurer to be particularly persuasive that every problem that Australia faces today started on the 21st of May. I know that's what those opposites are trying to put forward, but so many of these were many, many years in the making. And I have to agree with another Shadow Minister who I have some respect for, a West Australian, the Shadow Defence Minister, who really told the truth about what happened in the former government just over the last few years. He said, quote, "I think after the 2017 the party was lazy. Quote, it did no intellectual heavy lifting and thought the tide would turn." That's some really honest speaking from the member for Canning.
Don't get that from the member for Hume.
And when it comes to the 6 months and what has been delivered for the Australian people, we have had an increase in the minimum wage because this side was elected and we wrote to the Fair Work Commission supporting an increase. We had a 15% pay rise for aged care workers, some of the hardest working people in the care economy. We've had medicine prices reduced to $30 per script, down from $42. We have 180,000 fee-free TAFE places. We've ended the cashless debit card. We've started the Robodebt Royal Commission so that people who had unfair fines and the stress that came with them put in their letterbox can finally get justice. We've got childcare that will be on average $1,700 cheaper for families. We've got an extra 20,000 university places for people from low socioeconomic and disadvantaged backgrounds. We've got legislation in front of the Parliament right now to close the gender pay gap. And we've got action in our local communities. In Boothby, In Boothby, $200 million investment in the Flinders Medical Centre. In Reid, $8.5 million investment in the Hill Road upgrade. In Moreton, a koala crossing to help our beloved koalas get from one part to another of Toohey Forest. And in Chisholm, the Box Hill City Oval upgrade, much needed for those communities. We go further because it's not just about cost of living, it's also about quality of living, quality of food in aged care, quality of voice for those who might not feel this parliament always hears them. And I commend the work that Minister Ali has done with the Youth Steering Committee, quality of living when it comes to secure jobs, so that people can have secure jobs and we can outlaw things such as sexual harassment, which is attached to the legislation in front of the Senate right now. Quality of living and be able to get to a doctor and see a doctor with bulk billing through 50 Medicare urgent care clinics. And I remember the Liberal National cost of living record cuts to JobKeeper, frozen Medicare payments, hiked up university fees, 22 failed energy policies. They tried to force Western Australia to privatise Western Power, and they said low wage growth was a deliberate design
Time's
feature of their
expired,
budgets.
And I give the call to the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I'll take the member for Perth up on a couple of points. Cuts to JobKeeper. We were the ones who instigated JobKeeper, which saved